Why is it so important at this point to defend public services?
Well, for about 20 years now, I think, depending on where you start the clock, we've really been facing a very coherent ideology that has managed to move the perception that people have away from the idea that we're all in this together, that we should be looking after each other, that we sort of share our resources within the community. And we've been told, first of all, that there are fewer resources, which is, of course, just nonsense. We've been told that we can't afford public services anymore. We've been told that the way to achieve things is for people to pursue their individual greed kind of notions instead of the community. And underlying all that has been a fundamental shift in the way that public services are financed. Tax cuts for the wealthy have been taking place for all of during that 20 years, tax cuts for corporations. There's been no empirical evidence that that does anything for the economy. In fact, the opposite is true. We can prove it hurts the economy. But on top of that, of course, it really hurts the delivery of public services. So that notion that we're a collective country, that we owe duty to each other, has been eroded in favor of a tax cut mentality that says if you got money, you should be able to keep it.
And now, with the economic crisis that hit 2 years ago, what's been the impact then?
Well, it's interesting. The economic crisis, of course, was caused by that. Great inequality always causes economic instability. It happened in the 30s. It happened now. The last time we had this kind of inequality in the community was in 1929-30, before the great crash then. You can't have fundamental inequality and have a healthy economy in our kind of society. But now, because the banks had to be bailed out, because of the private sector had to be bailed out, governments are saying they've got these huge debts. The only solution they can think of is to once again cut public services, cut the salaries and the jobs of public sector workers, cut the services that people rely on. The fact is that it's no more true now than it ever was. There is, of course, a deficit. But if we went back and repaired the taxation system, that deficit would disappear. It's not caused by overspending on public services. It's caused by under-taxation of people who have the wealth and the companies and the individuals who've made out like bandits.
So there are people and forces that have caused this crisis now, and they're trying to shift the blame onto others.
Sure. There's countries in Europe that are just classic examples where the banks were bailed out by the IMF and the EU, and the banks took their money and went home. The public sector and public sector services are still paying the price. It's not quite as dramatic here, but it's the same syndrome. The tax cuts go to the corporations that are doing well, go to the people who have money at the top. Governments turn around and say, well, gee golly, we've got to cut public services because we have a deficit. It wasn't caused by public sector workers.
So, and we have the specter now of provincial and federal governments making pretty drastic cuts to public services and demanding so-called sacrifices of public servants. How do you fight that mentality when Canadians are convinced that the deficit, the debt are terrible problems, and they're worried about the spending on public services?
We rely on a brand new method, and I'm being a bit facetious. It's so we tell people the truth. We've built a case that really exposes the truth of this whole syndrome that we've seen. Tax cuts leading to deficits, which leads to a tax on public services. So what we're doing is we're equipping a whole bunch of our members with the fundamental knowledge about what the truth is. And we're asking them to go back and speak the truth to their fellow members, because we've got 350,000 people in the National Union. That's an interesting base to start from. If we can talk to 350 may be a bit high as a target. If we can reach 250,000 of our members over the course of a couple of years and equip them with the truth that this is not an overspending problem, it's an underfunding problem, it's a taxation problem, we'll be well equipped because they'll be able to talk to their friends and neighbors, and the information will spread. And what we've got now is a population that has been lied to fundamentally for probably 20 years, and we're trying to stop the lies.
That's a pretty tall order. You're basically talking about a word-of-mouth campaign as opposed to a traditional advertising campaign. Why is that?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is when we say our members, we're really talking about the public. When we say 350,000 members, these aren't 350,000 union activists. A lot of them are just members of the public like everybody else. So if we can talk to our members, we're talking to the public. The other thing, though, is that we've faced over the last couple of years when the crisis hit, we faced a lot of our members who were saying to us when we were out there explaining what was going on, what was happening, and why the attack was now coming on public services, they would be saying to us that they never heard that analysis before. it woke us up to the fact that we need to be spending more time talking to our own members, because if we assume a knowledge base in our membership that isn't true and try and leapfrog over that to talk to the public without that base of support, it isn't going to be nearly as effective.
I guess public servants are no different from any other Canadians. They're subject to the same kind of information sources. They hear news the same places, and I guess a lot of them haven't really heard the message.
That's absolutely right. Most people in Canada would believe that Greece, for example, was caused by overspending, a foolish government that had to be bailed out by the international community, all the sort of nonsense that we hear. In fact, Greece doesn't spend any more on public services than anybody else. They have a taxation problem. So that kind of fundamental knowledge that sets a mindset for people that this is always about spending, always about need to cut spending, we're just trying to turn that around and give people the truth that equips them to deal with that kind of argument.
And you're trying to train your people to deliver that message on a very personal way, in a very personal way.
Yes, although, personal is a kind of elastic term. One-on-one conversations, two-on-two conversations, presenting to a local meeting, presenting to a labor council, all of those things are on the table, but we're equipping about 100 people here to go out, and we figure if 100 people can talk to 100 people each, then that just sort of keeps on spreading downward and downward, and we keep on getting the information. We get the information out in the way that unions have always done, by talking to our members instead of buying ads in the newspaper.
Mm-hmm. In provinces, I know Ontario because I live in Ontario. Here in Ontario, the government is demanding a wage freeze of public servants. How can this kind of campaign counteract those kinds of demands?
Well, Ontario did us a favor, the government, when they put the budget out, because they said we're going to save $750 million by cutting the wages of public sector workers in Ontario. And then they said a couple of paragraphs later, and we're going to give a $4.5 billion tax cut to corporations. So for us, it's actually pretty easy to demonstrate that in Ontario, it's a very straight line. We're cutting public sector wages in order to subsidize profitable corporations. That's just crazy. What we need to do is we need to present people with that fundamental truth, because once they figure that out, once they understand the facts, the sympathy for that public sector wage cut is going to evaporate.
Well, I wish you luck with your campaign, Larry. It's going to take some time, isn't it?
Yeah, we're not going to turn this around in a week or a month, but we're going to start turning it around as soon as people leave here, and that's the exciting thing.